Hey everyone, this is James from TDB here, bringing you another in-between episode. Today will be a non-drinking in-between episode. I'm going to talk about a little bit of housekeeping I've been doing in my stash, as well as kind of clearing up different cakes and samples. As many of you know, I do have a daughter. She recently turned 1. And so, in the past 5-6 months, of course, we've been going through changes as she's become more mobile. And so we've moved around spaces. So you probably noticed the new TDB set, and that's a result of some of these changes. But it's also been kind of a chance for me. I have more time now, so I can kind of sort of pour myself back into tea and sort of reinvigorate those hobbies to some extent, which is another reason I'm restarting to blog and such things. But it's also given me a chance to kind of clear up samples and look at kind of what I have and get rid of potentially things that I don't want. And so, it's kind of been a periodic house cleaning. I do this every now and then. As you might expect, I end up with lots of random stuff, some of it through my own ordering, just kind of like cakes that might be interesting on Taobao or whatever. And there's nothing worse than like a cake you don't want to drink that's not terrible, but it not terrible enough to just immediately compost, but not good enough to that you ever want to drink it, and you've had it once, so it's like opened, and so a lot of stuff like that I've been like kind of conscientious about and trying to get rid of, and just trying to think through kind of different ways of getting rid of stuff. So I'm going to be talking a bit about that. One post I did in 2019, a little bit before kind of the blog I stopped posting on the blog, was this thing on kind of nerdy tea advanced metrics. And these are sort of inspired by advanced metrics in sports. For me, at least, I'm a basketball fan, but baseball is probably kind of the first one. The George Washington of kind of advanced metrics sort of started there. And you have things like VORP and WAR. If you know baseball, you probably know these. VORP is value over replacement player. WAR is sort of a similar one, wins above replacement. So the idea is you're sort of quantifying how valuable these players are in terms of wins. So something that's very, very practical. A baseball team wants to win more games so they can make it to the playoffs and yada, yada, yada. So someone that is bringing a very positive value in terms of wins is obviously more valuable than someone else. And so I think this is helpful. This is helpful in sort of the baseball sense, because like if you have for instance, a designated hitter, you would expect a certain amount of value from them because they're not playing defense. So you would expect that to come through hitting and stuff like that. So the value over replacement player for players that are basically equal in terms of offensive output would be higher for instance, someone like a shortstop that's at least average defensively over someone like a designated hitter. So anyways, I'm going off on a tangent now, but I was thinking about these things and I translated it into tea. I did this a while ago, so you could go ahead and check out that post if you are curious about it. Certainly not a requirement, but it's a way that, I found to be somewhat helpful to think about things. And so there are two kind of metrics that I came up with. So one of them is value over replacement tea. So this is basically like looking at a tea and figuring out, is this tea, how would this tea, what would I buy if I was trying to replace this tea in my stash? And so thinking about it in sort of that context, that's been, sort of useful. But the one that I found to be particularly pertinent for this situation is VOATO, value over average tea owned. And this is one of those metrics that I have sort of refined it. But what does it mean exactly? It means basically looking at your stash, and if you're sampling something from a certain vendor, you're looking at how does that tea compare with average tea in my stash. What I've done actually is I've sort of categorized this a little bit further, and I think it's not too valuable to get too complicated, but I did find it valuable to basically put my pour into 3 sort of basic categories. One of them is factory tea, another one is Iwu tea, and another one is kind of the other miscellaneous category, which is a little bit nebulous and a little bit harder to define, but there are plenty of teas that fall into that category as well. And so in the case of Iwu teas, I own quite a few, and I own a lot that I enjoy quite a bit. So the value over average tea owned, you'd have to be a pretty good tea in order to beat that. So it makes sense for me, if I were interested in buying Iwu tea, that it has to bring something very different to the table or just be much, much better than the average tea. I really like my average Yiwu, which is something like the 2007 Yongqing Hao Linya. And so it doesn't make any sense for me to buy something that's, a bit worse than it, even if the value is really good or even if it's really cheap. Unless I was planning on selling it or something, which I don't plan to do. And so I've been thinking about that in terms of samples and cakes that I have around. So if it has a worse sort of value over the average tea owned, and I would never want to drink it, or it doesn't have any interest to bring on an episode or something, I have just been getting rid of those teas, even though plenty of them are pretty decent. So yeah, that's that's how I've been doing it. I'm sure it's a very nerdy way to go about it. But yeah, I've been thinking just is this a tea? Even if this is good, regardless of quality, if it's not good enough, it just does not make sense to keep around. And so another sort of tea that I have been getting rid of as well are just sort of the wine samples that, they could be interesting, but I find that I'm not too interested in drinking them out of context, just drinking something random. I'd much rather have something that I am sort of aware of. So yeah, those are a few of my thoughts on kind of value over average tea owned, as well as clearing up samples. So thank you all for tuning in. Let me know how you like this episode. Let me know if you, just curious, trying something a little different. So thank you all for tuning in. I'll see y'all next time. Cheers.